Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the IVES number 7226 top is what this is. This is simply a top pivot that is going to be used on offset pivot applications. This client has ordered a top and a bottom and an intermediate, so 3 line items. The client could have ordered the 7226 as a set. I don't know why they didn't. They may just not have realized that you could buy it as a set. Doesn't really matter. It comes back the same way. But they ordered a top, a 7226 BTM, and then a 7226 INT. And that would give you everything you would need for a door up to 90-inch tall. Now this is a typical top pivot. If you've seen top pivots by any of the major manufacturers, this is going to look really similar to you. There are different types of top pivots in the sense that you've got a couple of different variations in terms of how they'll mount. This is for the typical garden variety. You have a rectangular door opening and a header is what this is. There are center hung and there are offset. This happens to be offset, and I know that because of where the vertical axis of pivoting is in relationship to the rest of the hardware. So the door is going to set over this area here, and the vertical axis of pivoting is offset from the face of the door to that vertical axis, that imaginary plumb bob right down the center of that pivoting axis. This is 3/4 inch offset. The dimension is going to likely come up on the template or something very similar to it, but 3/4 inch offset is the face of the door when it's installed per the template to that vertical axis of pivoting. The other offset that's relatively common is 1.5 inches. Now, having said that, it is possible in the world that you could have offset pivots with an unusual offset. I just, in fact, had a client, and if I recall, I'll show you photographs. He had ordered some custom pivots that I think had, well, they were probably 3/4 offset, but they were intended for a very unusual application where they needed to swing the door 270 degrees. So its dimension was much greater. So this leg of the pivot was much longer to account for the door thickness. Now, depending on the door thickness and how you consider special ordering a pivot for an unusual door thickness, that 3/4 inch dimension from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting may not be 3/4 inch. And in the world of custom pivots, and there aren't a lot of options, but there are people who make them, you can detail or define what you want that to be. But in the standard world of offset pivots, it's 3/4 inch. And if it's not that, it's 1.5 inches. If it's something else, highly unusual, highly custom, at that point it could be anything. What I end up getting into doing is using that offset dimension to account for other circumstances. So the job that's relatively recent in my head is a client had an unusual door thickness. Pair of doors installed on a wall. They swing out into a walk-in closet. On the face of the walls were chair rail and baseboard, with even some cove, I believe. The client needed pivots. He was advised incorrectly. Center hung wouldn't work because that vertical axis of pivoting would be down in the center of the thickness of the door. And that wouldn't work because you would need to severely bullnose the outside of those doors. And on this wall was just it wasn't wallpaper. It was all painted white walls, chair rail, and then mold. And those doors needed to kind of just flow in there, even though you'd see that 1/8 of an inch seam between the hinge style, the meeting style, and then on the other hinge style, and then of course across the head. Not a real elegant way to make that all hidden, although they could have. There's other hardware that could have been considered as well. But the unusual door thickness was complicated with the unusual material that was added to it. Plus, the client said, I want to hide the hardware as best as possible, and the door only needs to go to 90 degrees. Now, that's a problem going out to 90 degree when you have an unusual clearance requirement or an inset requirement. And this client still needed to miter his base and his chair rail so that the door could come and go to 90 degree, which was fine. It wasn't a secret, safe room or a bookcase that was hiding access to some other room. It just needed to be as inconspicuous as possible. So we went with an 1.5 inch offset because that basically simply just increased this dimension, allowed him to scooch that back underneath the door itself because we had that applied material, and the vertical axis of pivoting was all but hidden under a notching detail that they did on the baseboard that was mounted to the door itself. So sometimes you get into using offset as a way to solve problems, but that is unusual. It's not unusual, it's simply uncommon. If you're dealing with standard applications, it's 3/4 offset. You do need to think about it though, because you need to think about what is the offset and what does my project require? What does my application require? So think about that dimension of 3/4 inch from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting when you're taking into account what is the degree of opening? What will that do when I try to get the door to 90 and then past 90? Is that offset too short to allow me to get past 100 degree? Maybe I need to go to 180 degree, at which point you need to calculate what is the clearance dimension, what is the inset, what is my dimension, and calculate all that out. You might need an 1.5 inch offset on an otherwise typical application just because you need to get to 180 degree and your door is moved in, or you have unusually thick brick mold or an inset, something that you have to account for. So the moral of the story is where that vertical axis of pivoting needs to be thought through. And if you're not thinking about it at all, which is okay, probably 3/4 offset is all you need. Typical material. This is going to include instructions, which we will touch on in a moment. This is going to include fasteners for both wood and metal applications, aluminum or metal or wood applications. There's an Allen wrench in there. That is so that you can remove the hex cap. That will allow you to service that pin that's in there. Okay, these are completely non-handed. You're going to want to certainly reverse where that pivot is. Well, when you install this plate goes to the header, this plate goes, or this way, goes to the top of the door. You'll remove that hex cap with the Allen wrench. You'll pull that pin out, and when you get the door placed onto the bottom pivot, you'll tip it into the opening, and then you'll drive that pin down and secure that hex cap. That's how you secure the top. Okay. You're going to need that Allen wrench for servicing that. Actually, the Allen wrench that's in here is not for servicing this. It's for servicing the fact that you're holding the pin in. Anyway, that's on the instructions. Let's switch to the screen view and let's take a closer look at the supporting documentation. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Here's the item that we're looking at. Top pivot only. Extended description information down here. 3/4 inch top pivot only, satin chrome brass. What that means is the base material is brass and that it's a satin chrome plating on it. IVES calls that US26D. You could also call it 626, but the factory calls it 26D. Top pivot header mount, used with 1 3/4 minimum thickness with 1/8 inch bevel in 2. We'll talk about that in a moment. Could you squeeze this onto a marginally thinner door? Yeah, you could, but this is meant for 1 3/4 and you don't have a lot of room to play with. Vertical adjustment range 3/16 with positive locking. That is not an appropriate reference to this top pivot. It would be to the bottom pivot or the set. Making a note to remove that line because it doesn't belong. It's ANSI rated. UL listed for 20 minute. Why only 20 minute doors? Why not 90? Because it's made of brass. That's why. It's made of brass. There are some other pivots that are in the catalog which we'll look at. A handing chart doesn't really apply to a top pivot because they are non-handed, but it's nice to see that. That's a right hand or a left hand reverse. It's a right hand swing or a left hand reverse swing. 1/8 of an inch bevel. We'll talk about that. Let's take a look at some photographs that we have. There's the packaging. There's everything else. The contents. I suppose this would be showing a left-hand door open to about, say, 30 degree, I guess. A door open to 90 degree. Another set of images here showing the knuckle assembly. Just a close-up of the finish, I suppose. And then the accessories, the Allen wrench, the metal and wood screws, and then your installation instructions. Now there are some links below, as seen here. There's a template. Yeah, let's take a look at that template first. Page 1, forgive me. Top pivot. So what the template gives you, it actually gives you everything you need to install and mortise this. There is a separate document, installation instructions, which we're going to look at in a moment. This does tell you everything that you need, though. It's always handy to know what hardware you're looking at, and we are looking at a right hand or left hand reverse. Gives you the size of the pivot, gives you the important information. And when I've machined these, here's what I've looked at. 3/16. That tells me where this is. 5/16. That tells me where this is. I don't need to know anything else. Well, that's not true. I need to know that it's 4 1/4. I need to know that it's 1 1/16. And I most definitely need to know that it's 1/4 inch. At that point, I pretty much have everything I need. I don't know what this is kind of showing me that it's radiused. It is marginally radiused. I don't see that there's a note anywhere about that being radiused. I would just end up squaring those corners out. It doesn't tell me what that radius is that I'm aware of. If it did, I suppose I could use a small enough router bit, small enough diameter to give me that exact radius, but actually, now that I'm thinking of it, it really should, because you are going to see that up in the header. Yeah, I don't see that information anywhere, and the truth of the matter is that it should be there. Not that you're going to use a 1/4 inch diameter or a 3/8 or 5/16 diameter router bit, but you would like to know that radius. It is not completely uncommon to find an IVES template that is missing some information that would otherwise be important, but whatever that radius is, it is very small. Very small. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. In order to get the door to close correctly, because of the point of rotation, that corner there might make unintentional contact with the face of your stop. So they want that to be beveled, or a very slight radius put on there. The drawing doesn't show it, but they're saying bevel this 1/8 inch. For every 2 inches in door thickness, they want it beveled 1/8 of an inch. So that's the 1/8 in 2. 5/16 radius, typical. This would normally be radiused here. It really never is, but the template says it should be, that it needs to be, in fact. And that I've seen I've seen installations that started to fail, and part of what was contributing to it was that lack of a radius there. There are also installation instructions linked to down below. There is not a lot to see here. It's very simple. You'll remove the cap. That pivot pin will have to come out when you're installing it. You will get the door put up into place. You will push that pin up. You'll secure the pin with the set screw and then tighten your cap. That's all there is to it. There's nothing else to see here. Oh, that's funny. 3/16 radius, but on the template they call it 5/16. I'm going to say that 5/16 is correct, but 3/16 would likely work. Yeah, they're showing that better there. Notes are here. I'll leave that to you to read. There's not really much to talk about there. Now, there's also a link below to the product catalog. That's going to allow you to review all of the IVES items that are, the pivots that are in here. So if you searched for 7226 and you continue to cycle through the catalog, you would get to the page eventually where you could see it. And here's the 7226 top pivot. Shows you the F version, which is going to be your fire rated version, 3-hour. That's not going to be made of brass, that's for sure, which is going to be why also they use F in the part number. That stands for ferrous. And then you'll also note they call it out for steel. But that's also why they use those US numbers. So US26D is brass, and that means satin chrome. Turns out that's a bad example because they don't offer it. So US3 is polished brass over brass. They also use it on a steel base, but you'll notice the BHMA number goes from 605 to 632, and that's because 605 means brass-based material and 632, well, you guessed it, means steel-based material. Sprayed finishes would be the SP. They have stainless steel, both satin and polished. And satin, brass, bronze, aluminum, dark bronze, and black are the painted finishes here. Now, there's a link below, as seen here, to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up. From that link, you'll be able to pull up not only all of the IVES products that we sell by means of this horizontal navigation, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to that full product catalog. And then other encyclopedic documents that are here. Mounting types are discussed, technical manual, product overview, and then a couple of old IVES catalogs from the turn of the 20th century. Really interesting, 1896 and 1904. Let's wrap up this video on camera. So the name IVES is really historically not thought of at all as pivots. If there was an old-timer carpenter sitting here from the 1980s, to him, IVES doesn't make pivots. Not at all, because they didn't back then. They were really known for window hardware. If someone walked in for IVES, it was some trim and auxiliary and likely sash lifts or sash locks or really nice solid brass, typical but nice solid brass baseboard mounted door stops. But getting under the Allegiant umbrella, now IVES is that section of your Schlage, LCN, Von Duprin, Glen Johnson, Falcon, Zero that provides the trim and auxiliary, but also the hanging devices. Pivots, obviously, hinges, continuous aluminum geared hinges, pin and barrel hinges, and then all of the trim and auxiliary, push and pull hardware, flat goods, stops, things of that nature as well. Because it's IVES under Allegiant, that means that the technical support is exceptional. Whether it be Schlage, LCN, I didn't mention Von Duprin. It's a culture of technical support excellence there, and to them for that I say thank you. Any questions on the 7226 top pivot or any other IVES product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.